What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another installment of Best Lists in 40K. It feels like it's been just a few days since the last installment of this series, because it has been. I did one last week after the WTC of all of the non-WTC results, and in that video, I had some choice things to say about the Aeldari faction. Ben Sherwin, over a 6-round event, actually didn't drop a single point, scoring a perfect 600. I don't know if I've ever seen that before, but I'm not surprised that Aeldari were able to do it. We're not going to dive too much into these lists. They are almost identical. They both run Fire Prisms and Wraith Knights and stuff like that, so there they are. I mean, if you want to see Aeldari lists, I did talk about Aeldari lists on every other installment of this video, so yeah, that's what I have to say about that faction. Please nerf soon, GW, oh my god. And unfortunately for the Warhammer 40k community, that trend sort of continues. This weekend was a huge one for competitive 40k. There were a lot of large, at least large GT major, not so many super major level events, but there was a volume of results to sift through. And unfortunately for us, most of them were won by Aeldari. Now, like we did last week, what I'll do is actually dive into some maybe not X and O results to dive into some factions that are a little bit less played on the competitive scene. But before we jump in there, we'll start by talking a little seriously about the state of the Aeldari faction within the game. I think honestly the faction right now kind of represents an existential threat to competitive 40k as we know it. It hasn't been since 8th edition when the Space Marine Codex came out and was by far the most powerful thing in the game for a long time, until it went through several reworks in order to bring it down to the level of other factions that I've seen, I think, a meta this imbalanced. This week, Aeldari had more undefeated records than every other faction put together. In fact, they won more events than all the other factions combined. This included the Salt Lake Open, Roll for Damage GT, CCBB 2023, Gateway Open, Goonhammer Open, Leighton Midnight Melee, and Grimdark 14 GT. With these results in mind, it's becoming clearer and clearer that if you want to do well at an event greater than 5 rounds, you must play Aeldari for the time being. And that is an absolute travesty of a state for the game to be in. The game needs a new data slate as soon as possible to prevent these results from draining players away from the competitive scene. Speaking anecdotally, I know player attendance in local events near me has been dropping precipitously, especially at the larger events where Aeldari are going to be overrepresented. Smaller events have a social contract not to play the faction in order to make the playing field actually fair for other players. And while this weekend was pretty large, and obviously we had the WTC and War Masters GT last week, I wouldn't be shocked to see event attendance universally begin to drop off as well. The state that this faction has been in, even after multiple revisions, is just unacceptable. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about Aeldari anymore. If you want to hear about Aeldari, probably deep dive on some of the lists on my Tuesday show. We're going to move on now and talk about factions that aren't as ludicrously overpowered and the players who piloted them to an actual respectable achievement. And that starts with Adeptus Custodes, who took down 2 GTs this week between Sarhammer and Cruisehammer. Cruisehammer is the one we'll talk about, and it was a 31-player GT played on Oasis of the Seas, a cruise ship. That's rad, and you can find more about them at cruisehammer.org. This list was piloted by Gabriel Nordstrom. Included a Blade Champion and Shield Captain alongside Trajan Valoris, each of them slotting into a 9-model Custodian Guard squad. These enormous bricks would give them a pretty solid bodyguard to protect them and allow the force multiplication effects of these characters to go as far as possible. It's a pretty straightforward list. We're not rocking Wardens or any of the other specialist infantry. There are a couple units of Alaris Custodians and a Calidus Assassin to fulfill utility roles, but most of the list is just going to be rocking 30 Custodian Guard across the table at you and hoping that you can't deal with the ridiculous volume of high OC re-rolling wound roll attacks just bearing down on you. And clearly it went pretty well because Gabriel was able to take down the event. Moving on, GSC continues to put up some results, but I think has solidly settled into their role in the second tier of the metagame, around where Custodes and Necrons and some of those other factions are living. They did take down 2 GTs this weekend, including the Trident Wargaming GT and the Iberian Parates tournament. That's the one we're going to talk about today. This was a 31-player GT in Madrid. This one was won by Manel Tula, who rocked a pretty interesting variety of Genestealer cults, including a Clavivus, 2 Nexoses, triple Primus, and 2 Reductus Saboteurs. The list was also very heavily focused on demolition charges, probably making use of the new FAQ that allows demolition charges to respawn with the unit carrying them, even if they were used before the unit was destroyed. When they return to the table with Cult Ambush, they're considered a new unit that was added to your army, and thus have all of their one-shot weapons back. With that in mind, it ran 4 units of 10 Acolyte hybrids with 4 demolition charges and a bunch of hand flamers each, alongside a slightly lower number, only 3 units of 20 Neophyte hybrids with their grenade launchers and seismic cannons. We do have 1 Achilles Ridge Runner with a spotter in order to remove cover and give additional AP to these units. And last but certainly not least, 10 Aberrants. The Aberrants actually don't have an attachment in this list. As far as I know, none of the characters join into them, and often you'll see them with Executable Cunning to allow them to forward deploy, but this list isn't running them. So these guys are just acting as a bit of a late game powerhouse. They're extremely difficult to kill, hit pretty hard, and can act as a really resilient bulwark that Genestealer cults don't normally get access to. Moving on to Thousand Suns. The Pecking Order GT was a 54-player GT held in Washington State in the United States, and had a lot of really interesting results. Every week it seems like we get one GT that doesn't have a huge population of Eldar players, and we actually get some really interesting lists from those events. The event had 2 undefeated players. The winner was Alex Pina playing Thousand Suns. Now, last week I talked about Kit Smith Hannah's undefeated Thousand Suns list, and this one is almost identical, so we're not going to go through everything in great detail. I talk about all of the particulars of that list last week. It is running the triple Infernal Master plus a bunch of additional sorcerers combination with a lot of 5 model Rubric Marine squads. Really interesting to see this build coming to the fore in Thousand Suns. It's super unique. I'm gonna have to give it a try just to see how it goes. Now, this list isn't identical to Kit Smith Hannah's list. It is running instead double disc sorcerers rather than a foot sorcerer and a disc exalted sorcerer, alongside blue scribes instead of the changeling to free up some points. But otherwise, it is identical. Now, the other undefeated player was Tarzan playing Orks. I assumed that instead of wahing, he did like the Tarzan yodel. Now, normally I screenshot the list and put that in the video so I don't miss anything, but this one was formatted really badly on BCP, so instead I did actually copy and paste it here. It's running Gazgo Thraka, Captain Badrick, and Mazrog Scragbad, the triumvirate of powerful orc characters. Captain Badrick is joining a unit of 10 Flash Gits. Mazrog Scragbad doesn't need to join anything because he is a beatstick by himself. We also have 10 Gretchen to farm some command points, 3 units of 4 Grot Tank, which can add a ton of Ballistic Steel 4 rocket launches to the army and have themselves a reactive move, which actually makes them a little bit hard to pin down in melee. Kind of a cute unit. There is a unit of 3 Mega Knobs for Gazgul to attach into to protect him a little bit, alongside 3 units of 2 Mech Guns, 3 units of 3 Squigog Boys, and a unit of 5 Storm Boys. Super interesting list, bringing a ton of character pressure, backed up by a lot of pretty solid guns. Flash Gits have a pretty high volume of 2 damage attacks. They can, with attached Captain Badrick, re-roll their hits and once per game get lethal hits, which make them pretty good at attacking a wide variety of targets for a pretty reasonable points cost. We also have a bunch of those mech guns sitting in the back, just pounding away at enemies and making room for the Squighog Boys and the other aggressive units to get in and actually fight for primary. Pretty unique orc list, and it's cool to see different builds coming out of orcs that aren't just focused on dedicated transports and running as many forward infantry squads as possible. Now, those weren't the only interesting lists from the Pecking Order. Chaos Demons actually took 3rd place with an undefeated record, 4-0-1, so 1 draw on their record. This was piloted by Marty O'Connell, who is playing Bellicor, a Bloodthirster with Argath, the King of Blades, a regular Khorne Demon Prince, which is an interesting include. We haven't seen that guy too much on the table, but he does help out protect the other ground pounders pretty well. Kairos Fate Weaver as well as Shalaxi Hellbane. We then have 2 units of Blue Horrors, a pretty resilient support unit, 2 units of 3 Nurglings to screen the main brick a little bit and score secondaries. They're not very good at scoring primary, unfortunately, being OC0, but they are useful at doing things like jumping into Deep Strike to score behind enemy lines, or grabbing mid-board secondaries early, like deploy Teleport Homers, alongside 2 units of Fleshhounds. Interesting to see no lone operative characters in this list, so we're not running Blue Scribes or the Changeling. Instead, we're focusing on the big beatstick characters, including that Demon Prince of Chaos, which, with the Mark of Khorne, actually gets it to strength 10 and can hit relatively hard as a late-game anchor. Now, moving on to the land down under, we saw the Bendigo Open, a 35-player GT in Victoria, Australia. This one was won by Imperial Knights. Hugh Titchener took this one to a 5-0 record, including a Knight Valiant, a Knight Gallant with Unyielding Paragon to reduce AP targeting him, 6 Armiger Warglaves, an Exaction Squad just to act as a backline objective holder, and a Calidus Assassin. Extremely straightforward list today, not really actually focusing on bondsman abilities that much because we only have the Gallant that can apply its bondsman to Armigers, but it does have a ton of units that can run out, hold objectives, and force your opponent to deal with them, allowing the Knight Valiant to stomp around the table and kill a lot of their units. That Valiant is an absolute terror close up because it's able to kill heavy vehicles pretty easily with the Harpoon, and the Flamer is good enough both in regular shooting and Overwatch to kill a lot of infantry or even medium infantry squads in your opponent's turn. Now, those aren't the only interesting lists from the Bendigo Open, because we also saw Ian Pierce take Tau Empire to a 4-1 record. Tau's not a faction we see at the upper echelons too often, so it's always fun to talk about it. They do pop up occasionally, and there are definitely factions that are worse off than Tau, but it's nice to get some examples of them doing relatively well. This list was running Anva, a Cadre Fireblade, a Cold Star commander with Exemplar of the Kauyan, as well as a Crisis commander with Precision of the Patient Hunter. We also had an Ethereal in the list, a character we don't often see, to add some CP generation, and a Breacher team. We then had a unit of broadside battlesuits with their heavy rail rifles, bunch of missile drones in the unit as well to add some additional firepower, seeker missiles, and weapon support systems. We had a 6-model Crisis battlesuit team, these guys rocking a bunch of shield drones and cyclic ion blasters. That is usually where the Exemplar of the Kauyan commander goes, to give these guys sustain 2 when they are being guided a turn earlier than you would normally unlock your Kauyan effect. That allows the Precision of the Patient Hunter Crisis battlesuit to act as a little bit of a lone operative. He's not actually a lone operative, but he's able to hop in, observe for something with his marker drone, and then unleash a ton of firepower with +1 to hit and wound, thanks to Precision of the Patient Hunter. So this guy's very good at clearing out enemy utility units and opening space for the big Crisis team to drop and actually deal with hard targets. Since you want to avoid split firing as much as you can in Tau, having these little packets of damage that can remove particular enemy units extremely reliably is very important, so that you don't have to split shots off from your broadsides or your Crisis teams. We then had 2 Ghost Keel battlesuits, a unit of Kroot Hounds, 1 Piranha, 3 units of stealth battlesuits. These guys are not only good for forward deploying, but they also give rerolls to wound if they are observing for a unit, and then a pair of Tetras to give rerolls to hit to 1 unit that they're observing for. This is extremely useful on the Crisis battlesuits, but also pretty good early game on the broadsides. Very interesting list, and a lot of unique inclusions that we haven't seen in many Tau lists. I actually really like that little independent Tau commander. A lot of times he's with a bodyguard unit, but if you don't necessarily need that, he's just going to deep strike in and blow something up, then more power to you. Last but certainly not least, we're going to talk about the Gateway Open. This is a 70-player major held in Illinois in the United States. Unfortunately, it was won by Aeldari, and the runner-up was also shockingly Aeldari. But we did have an undefeated X0-1 Tyranids player, Ryan Verback, taking my favorite Boogie Boys to a technically undefeated record. This list is actually pretty unique and includes a lot of options that we don't typically see in Tyranid lists at this stage. It did have the Death Leaper, a Hive Tyrant, as well as Old One-Eye. That's right, there's Carnifexes coming, everybody, so get ready for that. We had 2 Biovores to score secondaries with their Spore Mine Launchers, kind of an auto-include for Tyranids at this point, then 2 Carnifexes for Old One-Eye to join into. Interestingly, these guys were kitted out for ranged damage. They had Bioplasma fitted on their head slot, as well as 2 sets of Death Spitters with Slimer Maggots. Because Old One-Eye gives you rerolls on all of your attacks, not just melee attacks, he himself is good in melee, and as long as he has a Carnifex with him, then he's going to be able to reroll his own attacks since it is a leader effect. But he also buffs his unit when shooting, which does incentivize you to take shooting Carnifexes alongside Old One-Eye himself. He himself is a good enough melee combatant that you don't really need the other Carnifexes to put in too much work in order to get work in melee out of the unit, but they, with ranged attacks, allow the unit to act in multiple phases that you wouldn't normally. This makes these guys pretty good at sweeping infantry and dealing a little bit of plink damage to heavier vehicles, especially with the lethal hits adaptation active on them, and just rerolling and fishing for 6s with Old One-Eye's effect. We then had an Exocrine to add some more hit rerolls as well, 3 Lictors, 2 Pyrovores to remove cover from people people and just act as a nice little 1 model 30-point unit. 2 Tyrannofexes with acid sprays, and 3 units of Zoanthropes, 1 of 6 and 2 of 3. This is a super cool list. Multiple Lictors, multiple Pyrovores, and a big brick of Carnifexes that's able to both shoot and fight in melee is pretty unique and interesting. There's a lot of obviously pretty standard includes in Tyranids that we see here, including Zoanthropes and Tyrannofexes, but I think the inclusion of all of the utility that the list brings alongside those big Carnifex bricks does make it pretty unique. And with that, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about these lists and the dominance of Aeldar in the game so far. They've been good, definitely since things started, but this is the first week that they have been kind of overpoweringly overrepresented. Anyway, big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.